We have not done an opening episode in a while,
Oh,
so
yes.
we already covered a lot of popular openings in the previous lessons, but there's one that we have not talked about yet, and it is the Benko Gambit.
Okay.
So this will be a brief intro into what this gambit is all about, how to play it as black, and also the best way to try to beat it as white.
And for you at home, of course, this is a brief moment I have to introduce. If you do not know it by now, but everybody has to know, right here. This is Svetlana's newest 60-minute course about openings. Some of them we were talking about in previous episodes, which had the most views because most people are interested in this. And some openings are very new and unique for you to discover. So check it out. If you're a premium member, you should automatically have it anyway. And if not, it's just €9.99 in euros now for at least. So get it, get it, get it. Okay, that's it. That's my plug. Now it's
Thank you,
now
Arne.
we can continue again. Benko Gambit. Okay, that is a tough opening. I know about that because I'm scared of it.
As white, you're scared of it?
I would be scared to play it as black because it's a black
Ah, okay.
opening, right? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So it starts with d4, knight f6, c4, c5, and it's defined by white pushing the pawn and black playing b5.
Yeah. And that is already, I mean,
It's
it's
scary.
yeah, but it is considered quite legit, right?
Yeah, well, the this opening lost a lot of popularity when the engines emerged, but
Ah.
I think it has some really fascinating strategic ideas that are definitely worth knowing, no matter your level. And it's definitely playable. It's playable online. It's even playable as a surprise. It's playable in classical. So, yeah, there's a lot. The idea is to sacrifice a pawn on the queen side for an enduring queenside pressure with the pieces. And white can accept or decline this gambit pawn. And in many countries, actually, particularly in Eastern Europe, it's called the Volga gambit. So that's another name that it goes
True.
by, named after the Volga River, I assume. And in the 1960s, this opening idea was promoted by Paul Benko, who was a grandmaster, and he played it, he wrote a book about it, and that's where the Benko name comes from. And now there's a lot of top players that have used it before, including Magnus Carlsen. I think he has
Exactly.
played it pretty seriously,
Yeah.
especially earlier. Bareyev played it, Dubov, and from the younger generation, a lot of them play it online, like Faruja, Desatorov, Siong. They play it online a lot at the very least. But yeah, as I said, I think it's worth knowing no matter your level, and I'll show both for white and for black ideas.
Okay. Curious. So what happens if we take?
Yeah, so that's the typical response.
Is it?
If
Okay.
you don't take, then it often transposes, or black can even take themselves on c4, and that leads to slightly different
Hmm.
positions. And after a6, we give another pawn, and white has either can either accept it or not accept it. So let's say they don't do anything with that pawn and they keep developing like this. Well, then we can take it right here. And there's a lot of really interesting lines here. There's in case white doesn't accept the pawn at all, we can even push it, and this looks pretty good. And if they, let's say, take it on b5, then queen to a5, the knight has to come back, and then one of the possible pawn breakthroughs is for black to go e6 later. I'm just showing like a sample line.
Sure.
You undermine the center with e6, you put some pressure on the center, and you have an open A and B file. Although this one is not the most typical position of the Benko, just because it's the knight c3 line, which is a bit of a sideline.
Hmm.
But that's one of the options. Another side option is to play e3, not very ambitious, which is where, once again, you can go for the e6 pawn break instead, and then get a great center. And there's one more elaborate way, other than the main line, to give this pawn back, which is
Oh.
b6. You could recapture back with the queen. I think this makes sense, but you could also wait, play d6, and then try to take it back with the knight, because the knight is pretty useful there anyway. But the idea here is for white to not let black have this A file, which is normally they get the A and the B file for instead of the pawn, but here it's just even material, and well, the game goes on, but without the accepted pawn. But
Hmm.
we'll get the fun stuff, which is where black accepts it. What do you think black gets in return for this pawn?
Yeah, I'm just have to notice, of course, sometimes I like to play the wing gambit as a Sicilian, and that is almost, yeah, it's
Similar
very
theme.
similar. It's very similar to that side, and I like it. So I understand the idea that it is good to sacrifice. So I think in the wing gambit, if I remember correctly, there is normally a standard way to take with the bishop, which makes a lot of sense because then, yeah, we have a nice diagonal and yeah, that. But there's also lines where black can take with the knight,
Hmm.
rarely ever with the rook. That doesn't make that much sense. And
Hmm.
furthermore, there's also this queen check on a5, I think, which is another variation. But yeah, I think mostly it is really about taking the pawn first. But there are probably some other sidelines like e6 immediately now, or d6 I can imagine. Maybe even, I don't know if there's a fianchetto idea about g6
Yeah,
at one point.
that's actually very common.
Oh, it is.
Exactly.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, so those are some good ideas. Usually there's two approaches, either taking the pawn immediately and the bishop is basically the only option in the Benko,
Hmm.
is to take back with the bishop, or the other idea is to play g6 first. And
Hmm.
this is a more modern approach, so many top level players actually prefer this because you'll take back with the bishop anyway. So they prefer to get another piece into the game. So let's say something like this happens and white plays e4, and in these positions we are gonna go for this like g6 d6 setup, but sometimes sometimes these e6 pawn breaks can work too, but it depends. And also you mentioned queen a5, and these ideas, I'll just obviously I won't show every theoretical
No, of
line,
course.
but queen to a5 is an option to start some tactics on because of the spin and in the center. And now the best move that white has to know is bishop to d2. And this might seem obvious, but actually I found a cool game where Gukesh played against Firouzja and he played
See,
a7.
I thought about this move. Yeah.
And this is actually a very useful idea to know for white, is that you can make this recapture um, less pleasant for black for sure. But here it is a mistake. Here it is a mistake because you allow all sorts of insane stuff, and black is actually really well off,
Wow.
and they just have too much initiative for it.
That was a game between Gukesh and Firouzja.
Yes, on like a
Jeez.
rapid game though,
Those
a rapid game.
rascals.
But this A7 idea that I'll say about is around here. Like you can play A7, give it up right away,
Yeah,
and make black recapture with the pawn.
I see, I see.
And another important thing about the Benko is that sometimes, let's say capture, take like this, queen e2. What do you think about a queen trade in the Benko? Who do you think it's gonna benefit, white or black?
That is interesting. Well, I think white, simply because of the A and B pawn. So if white manages to get rid of the C pawn too, now that's difficult. But yeah.
Actually, black doesn't mind the queen trade very often.
Oh.
So despite being down a pawn, these endgames actually have a lot of pretty good pressure for black because you get this constant pressure on these two pawns. And yes, this pawn is extra, but it's very, very hard to queen it. So the rooks will put a lot of pressure, and white's ideas are very often to push e5, to push f4. So for that, queens of course help more than for black. So in this line, black doesn't have to avoid the queen trade.
Mhm.
So you can know that as if you ever play it as black, you don't avoid it. You can always play something like this, and this I would say is pretty good because you just constantly target these pawns, get your rooks on the files, and eventually it's very likely to win back one of them. So this we looked a bit at g6, which is the more modern one, but bishop a6 is the more classic approach. So this one basically automatically white is gonna go knight to c3 because that's where the knight belongs. And in these lines, we are not really gonna play e6. We're just gonna stick to d6 and g6, which is the more common setup.
Is there ever
Now,
an option for white to also fianchetto?
To play g3 here?
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure it is. It's one of the options. And that way you sort of get rid of this diagonal pressure and you can castle safely.
Hmm.
And something like this happens where after white develops, you'll see that black's pieces are coming into play. The queen is going to come out, the rook is going to come out, and well, the theory will can go on here, but it's a game, and you will see who maneuvers better
Totally.
in the middle game. But you see, there's quite some pressure here. Then the knight is usually gonna reposition itself, try to come to c4, so things like that. This could be a possible setup. Um, yeah, they can also the rooks are pretty active. As black, I think this is a very common way um, to develop, so
Hmm.
it's useful to know this as black as well. But as white, I would recommend something else, a more ambitious line.
Okay.
But of course, this can be played, and it's a very popular line as well. It's the second most popular after the main move, which is e4. So just
Yeah.
ambitiously taking the center. And what do you think we're gonna do with the king after
Yeah.
this move takes on f1?
That is interesting. So I guess it is one of those half-hearted castling attempts. I guess the king will take, and at one point the king might fianchetto itself.
Exactly, that's what
Yeah.
happens. So this is basically a king walk that we see, or like a castling by hand that we see in the Benko all the time. This
Hmm.
is the main line of it, which both black and white should know about. And yeah, that's where the king is gonna go, and it feels pretty good here on g2. Sometimes maybe it will become exposed, but overall, you get it out of the way, and the rook is now active and can join on e1.
Yeah.
So this is the standard way to play, and maybe we'll look at this one just before the final way, which is what I think the best line is,
Okay.
and that you could play as white instead if your opponent ever plays the Benko. So rook to e1, usually white's idea is to push e5. If they manage to push a really good e5, I think that helps because you can combine it with e6 or even take here and then play bishop f4
Hmm.
to target this pawn, so just extra weakness. And black's idea, well, they can try to prevent it, for example, with moves like knight to g4. And this makes the knight go to e5, maybe later to
Oh.
c4, and of course, all the other plans with the queen coming out, with the rook coming here. So all of this is possible. And if you ever want, maybe you can even take on c3 if it's really, really necessary. But for now, I think the bishop is nice on its own.
It's definitely an opening which I haven't seen too many typical patterns I normally play. Like, because of
Hmm.
course I never play against the Benko, and I never played the Benko,
Yeah.
so this is all very new territory for me. Interesting.
They are very unique plans, and in fact, there's not like once you learn them once, they always repeat. All of these ideas are super similar. Maybe another idea to know is that sometimes black pushes c4 to put the
Hmm.
knight onto d3, whether through e5 or through c5. So there's quite a few. Sometimes white does get this pawn advance, but then we play something like c4 to reposition the knight. And yeah, just put constant pressure on these pawns. So it's important to know that you don't really try to get this pawn back. You just put your pieces on their best squares, and then if the pawn, of course, is given to you, then you take it. And
Uh-huh.
then it's great because then your pawn structure is more solid, and the king is definitely safer than white's because white's king, sure, it's safe for now, but maybe in the long run, some rook takes on a2, and then there's going to be problems in the second rank. So it's a long game. There's uh, there's a lot of these typical ideas to know, but once you learn them, they pretty much always repeat, and it's just going to be a complex middle game. So
Yes.
so now, do you want to know what I think the best line is against it?
No. Yeah, of course I
No,
want to
we
know.
can just stay delusional and think that this is great.
That'll do. Of course
Yeah.
I want to know. Now I'm very curious because yeah, let's see what is the most common or best way to conquer the Benko.
Yeah. So I would say that currently one of the best lines is a4. This
Huh.
gained popularity in the recent years, maybe decade, maybe even longer, but computers played a big part in this. Is that usually this wouldn't be a problem for the Benko, and you can just continue all of your other ideas that we've talked about, some repositioned knight, and
Hmm.
even new squares on b4 here. But this is quite unpleasant if white knows really a lot of theory here and plays all the best moves. The idea of a4 is actually to blockade with knight to b5. And that is really unpleasant for the black rooks that are trying to put pressure on the b2 pawn, on the a2 pawn. And once the knight gets there, it just kind of ruins that plan, or makes it less effective. So a4 is a good move. Now, black can develop in many ways. Let's say they could play, I don't know, queen to a5 or something like that.
Hmm.
Then bishop d2. Of course, this is still very much playable, but something like this, for example, is like
Okay.
already you see how black has less pressure
Yes,
than they
but
did
then I
before.
need to quickly ask because I didn't see it or I don't see it. If the knight goes to b5, black cannot take on e4 because. Thank you.
Because it's a discovered attack with the knight on b5.
Yeah, not a good
But
trade.
good points. A lot of the times before the jump, we actually defend the e4 pawn. So no,
Mm.
you make a good point. We actually defend that pawn many times. So yeah. There's also some ideas with for white that are worth knowing is that sometimes, let's say black tries to play like this. White's nice idea is rook to a3, which might look weird and very profound, and it is quite profound. The rook is just going to stand there, but you just want it to be defended just in case, so that, some rook cannot take rook b5 and have the rook on a1 be unprotected. So you
Okay.
just put the rook on a3. It can be helpful on in the center and on the other sides as well, but you just keep it there and to put the rest of the pieces on the regular squares. So positions like these are generally good for white, but as I said, it's quite tactical and there's a lot still left to play. And yeah, the whole point of a4 in all of these lines is to first protect on e4, like you mentioned.
Hmm.
We first protect and then put the knight onto b5. And even though, the game goes on and everything, but definitely with by looking at it a little bit more with the engines and everything, people did come to the conclusions that maybe it's not quite enough for the whole pawn because there was this a4 and knight to b5 idea.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, yeah. That is Have you ever played the Benko yourself or
Yeah, I've played it myself, even in classical.
even in classical games? And have you
Yeah.
played against it as well?
Yes, and I also like playing against it. So it's like if you're prepared and
Uh-huh.
you know the opponent is gonna play it, then it's nice. You can prepare some A4 line, or you can prepare even a different line. Let's say you like the fianchetto, you prepare the G3 line, and there's especially if you like material, if you like being up a pawn and that
Uh-huh.
gives you confidence, I think it's nice to play against it. But there's also a lot of some crazy tactical lines that are really fun to play for both colors. And as I said, I've played it as black. I think lately, because people learn so much theory, there's a lot of ways to sort of simplify it a bit too much. So simplify something, make this queen trade, let's say, or give up one pawn, and even let's say that one pawn gets given up, but so many pieces got traded that we are left, let's say, all of this is gone and we're left with just 5 against 5 and it's sort of only play on one side. So
Mm.
there's sometimes some simplifications if all of these pawns get traded off.
That is really interesting. There's one last question I have, if I may. Or
Yeah.
sorry, I didn't want to interrupt you. There's probably another part you want to mention, right?
No, you say.
Okay, so but I know that there's like one or two famous Benko traps. Can you
Mhm.
recall one or by any chance?
Which traps?
I don't know. Yeah,
Okay.
I wouldn't know, but there's like I think there's a trap where the knight takes on e4, the black knight, and then it's gone. Something like that.
I think a lot of it is about these queen a5 ideas.
Yeah.
So like I am. maybe it's these lines that we talked about with G6 at first, and then these like Queen A5 lines. Maybe it's these.
It could be, yes, it could be
Maybe it's
very well.
something like this. But yeah, definitely there's always these 94 tactics. Always using this pin. I don't know exactly which trap you're talking about, but there's definitely some miniatures where, let's say, black won really quickly because of this trap.
Yes,
So
yeah, I
yeah.
recall something like that. I'm probably I do this because of my memory, because I remember in the chess club where somebody was playing Benko Gambit, and then the people at the chess club of a niveau of 1600 to 1800 in the league when we were
Mhm.
playing, and one was playing the Benko Gambit.
Yeah.
And young one, he was preparing for that, and then people were talking in the pause room or in the room altogether. He playing the Benko Gambit and something,
Mhm.
and then he won after I think 9 or 10 moves or 12 moves or something like that, and we were all quite
Maybe
fascinated.
it's
But I don't
also some
remember it
like
anymore.
risky line,
Yeah,
right?
for sure.
Maybe it's something that's suboptimal for black that you could try to play, but to provoke a mistake from white.
Mm.
Maybe
Something
that's
like
one of
that.
those options. But even this, I mean, A7 was a nice trap that even Gukesh and Firouzja had to calculate and played in their rapid game.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So
Crazy opening.
there's some crazy lines like that too, of course, which maybe some of you, if you want to start playing it as black, you could prefer starting with G6.
Hmm.
But yeah, both of these, um, even though it's a gambit, I would say the other one is a bit more strategic. The one that I just showed, this one is a bit more strategic,
Yeah.
sacrifice rather than a tactical one.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a cool one to know as both colors because it will happen, maybe not often, but every once in a while. And I think it has a lot of really nice ideas, and it does make me sad that openings like this are losing their
Fading
popularity because
away.
they're getting too overanalyzed. But I think basically at any level you can still play it, you can still learn it, and it can work really, really well at yeah, at any level.
I agree. Be brave. Try out those openings. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, Svitlana, thank you so much. That was awesome.